Ou alors il
En
monte
tout cas,
sur le
merci
panneau
beaucoup,
aussi.
Najat.
Ouf.
Je te remercierai jamais assez, mais là je commence un peu à stresser. Mais en tout cas, ça se trouve, il y a plein de potes qui...
Salope. Salope. Salope.
C'est vieux, hein, ça n'a pas changé.
Combien de fois je t'ai dit de pas écraser les punaises sur la tapisserie?
Quel étage?
Deuxième.
Salope. Salope.
Vieille vache!
Vieille vache.
Bonjour. Alors, je viens de voir que nous réalisons un documentaire sur l'écrivain George Orwell qui a résidé à Paris en 1928 et dans cet immeuble, dans cet appartement même certainement. Enfin, c'était une chambre d'hôtel. C'était un hôtel à
C'est un peu
l'époque.
grand là pour une chambre d'hôtel, je pense.
C'est peut-être 2 chambres réunies, ça vous dérangerait pas qu'on vienne regarder?
Non,
Je sais
c'est
pas si
bon.
ça. Merci beaucoup. C'est très bien.
Hein? Tu t'imagines que t'habites dans cet hôtel? Tu peux pas les flanquer par la fenêtre comme tout le monde? Vieille vache! Salope!
This is the seaside town of Southwold, on the Suffolk coast in the east of England. About an hour's drive down the coast in that direction is the River Orwell, from which George Orwell took his pen surname. About an hour's drive up the coast in the other direction is where I grew up. It was here that George Orwell, then known as Eric Arthur Blair, wrote Down and Out in Paris and London, an autobiographical account of his time living as a dishwasher in Paris and a tramp in London. Orwell left England for Paris 80 years ago, in 1928, at the age of 25, the same age as I am now. He went in search of adventure and the bohemian lifestyle of his literary heroes, such as Émile Zola and the symbolists such as Baudelaire and Proust. What he found was a type of hardship and poverty that opened his eyes to the realities of life in Europe in the 1920s and affected his opinion and his work for the rest of his life. The idea of this film is to follow in his footsteps, to do today what he did back then, in an attempt to compare the scenes and characters Orwell describes in the book with what he would have seen if it had done the same thing today. This is number 3 Queen Street in Southwold. It's here that Orwell wrote a lot of Down and Out in Paris and London. By visiting the places that he writes about in the book and the places he went to whilst researching Down and Out, I hope to find out more about Orwell as a person, to unravel some of the differences and distinctions between George Orwell the writer and Eric Arthur Blair the man. First, I'm going to head to Norwich to interview a writer called DJ Taylor. He wrote this, which is probably the best Orwell biography that's ever been written.
Hello.
Hello
Sorry,
there.
I'm just keeping the dog from getting out.
Oh, sorry.
So you come in. Okay, do you want a cup of tea or something?
Oh, that'd be perfect, yeah.
I think Orwell went to Paris in 1928 simply because he wanted to be a writer. I think he just wanted to go somewhere where the literary action was at, and Paris was of course the great destination for writers in the 1920s. You can get by on not very much money. It was an agreeable kind of society, and I think Orwell went there to kind of train himself up to be a literary man. At this stage there was no real thought, I think, in his mind that he would write Down and Out in Paris and London. I don't think he was even particularly interested in social conditions at that point. I think Orwell took liberties, slight liberties in the way that he wrote, and I think what the result consequently is a kind of a patchwork, if you like, of things probably described from the life, things which he's invented slightly, 1 or 2 episodes which he's embroidered, passages of events where he has changed the sequence, that kind of thing. And the result is not quite realistic and yet not quite fiction at the same time. It treads a sort of a very interesting borderline, I think, between the two forms.
This house behind me with the blue plaque on Portobello Road in West London is the house in which George Orwell lived in the spring of 1928 before he left for Paris. It's also the house in which he first attempted to become a writer. A friend at the time writes that his room was so cold and he was so poor, he used to warm his hands above a candle before trying to write each day. Orwell's a very elusive figure for those trying to study him today. There's no film that remains of the man, precious few photographs, and of all the many recordings he made for the BBC, not a single record of his voice remains. So it's very interesting to have this material connection back to the man himself. Orwell's been one of my heroes for a long time. I first read Down and Out in Paris and London when I was a kid, and at high school I studied Animal Farm. I think it's part of the national curriculum to either study 1984 or Animal Farm, so Orwell's a writer that most people in the UK have grown up with, or most people my age anyway. He's a champion of both the left and the right, so he's sort of almost untouchable. It's difficult for anybody to say anything derogatory about him. I know that when writing Down and Out, a lot of the things he talks about he didn't actually do, or just hearsay that he turned into stories in the first person. I also know that in Paris he had a rich aunt who lived just around the corner from him, so if he ever wanted a slap-up meal or a roof over his head, he could always pop round there. However, I want to take the book at its word and do a lot of the things he writes about as though he had done them himself. In this vein, I've let my room out here in London. I have nowhere to stay, I'm now homeless, and I'm going to head off to Paris. Nothing else, it would be an adventure. So it's 6:30 in the morning and I'm here at Victoria coach station about to catch the bus to Paris, and everything's already looking a bit down and out. Down and Out in Paris and London is the first book that Eric Blair got published. It's also the first piece of his writing that he used the pseudonym George Orwell. So it's really through this book that George Orwell came into being. There are many reasons why people think that he chose to use a pseudonym, but probably the most believable is that a lot of the stuff he says and does in the book he felt would embarrass his family or bring his family into disrepute. When Orwell first arrived here in Paris, he was able to live quite comfortably for a year and a half on money that he had saved from working in the Burma police force. However, then he was robbed by an Italian man who he described as having side whiskers, which was the sign of an apache or a gangster. He was now really down and out, left with just 47 francs. He was, as they say in France, dans la dèche. In this film we're going to skip the bit where he lived for a year and a half quite comfortably because that's kind of boring, and go straight to the down and out bit. So I'm here in an internet cafe to show you my available balance, which is nil. So we're definitely down and out. Okay, so I've got 26 euros now because it cost €1 to use the internet, which I think gives me about 3 days in which I have to find a job. This is the Place de la Concorde in the centre of Paris. It was somewhere around here that George Orwell got his first job washing up dishes in a posh hotel. Unfortunately, we don't know which posh hotel, because to maintain its anonymity, he just called it Hotel X in the book. However, there are a lot of hotels around here, so I'm going to take my CV around to all of them and see if I can get a job doing the same thing. Bonjour, je cherche pour travail dans la cuisine.
Ok.
Si, c'est bon.
Si. Et moi, je vais le remettre au bureau du personnel, ok?
Merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie, au revoir.
Nous on donne à la DRH après.
Ah, merci beaucoup. Having no money means you have to walk everywhere. Orwell talks about walking 14 kilometres in one day and crossing the Seine 11 times trying to find a job. I think I've probably done about the same. It's just lucky that Paris is so much smaller than London and you can pretty much walk from one end of the city to the other in about 2 hours. without any money, I can't afford a hotel for tonight. So I've turned to the book for inspiration. Orwell mentioned sleeping here in the Jardin de Luxembourg and around the corner in the Jardin de Plomb. Unfortunately, both places are heavily guarded and patrolled day and night. It was very different in Orwell's time. Maybe it's something to do with the supposed terrorist threat, or maybe just that we live in a time of heightened security. However, we're going to have to try and find somewhere else to sleep. After Orwell had been robbed and he was left truly down and out, he contacted an old friend of his, a limping Russian waiter called Boris. I don't know any limping Russian waiters called Boris, but a friend of mine called Will is in Paris at the moment, and he says he's at a loose end and willing to help me with the film.
It's good. Are we alright? Are we alright, mate? Sofa? Yeah. Broken bed? What do you think?
No, with the sleeping bag it'll be fine. I'm sure. So that was it. First night sleeping rough in Paris. How was it for you, William?
It's good. It's good. I got bitten loads. You get bitten?
I think so, yeah. Lots of mosquitoes. Not very comfortable.
That was alright.
With no money and with the parks heavily guarded, we had to find somewhere else to sleep. So last night we found this sofa and this old bed, and this is where we stayed. It's quite nice. What do you want for breakfast?
Bread.
Bread. So,
Bread.
off to find bread for breakfast. This is number 6, Rue de Pot de Fer, which is where Orwell lived when he was in Paris. He calls it Rue Coq d'Or in the book, but like many things he changes the name. It was a semi-working class area, but thanks to the universities around here, it was full of lots of bohemians. In fact, Hemingway lived just around the corner when he was in Paris, and with Orwell's aspirations to become a writer, this would have suited him down to the ground. This is Young and Happy, which is the closest cheap hotel to where Orwell used to live on the Pot de Fer up there. It's kind of a backpackers hostel, and full of backpackers and young people from around the world.
I'm from San Diego, California.
Billings, Montana.
San Francisco, California.
Yasuhiro, Japan.
I'm Enrique.
And Felipe.
We're from Ecuador and we're here for a day.
We're both from Powell, Wyoming. We've been studying there.
From talking to some of the people who are staying in the cheap hotels in this area near where Orwell used to stay, they're a far more transient community than in Orwell's time. People now stay for a few days and then move off to some other place in Europe or even the world. In Orwell's time, people stayed a lot longer. People would rent a room for months, if not years, whilst they worked here in the city. So I think I'm going to have to look elsewhere in Paris to try and find a similar hotel today. Therefore I'm going to go up to the Tourist Information Centre and ask where in Paris we can find the cheap hotels and see if the clientele are different. So I've come here to the tourist office in the centre of Paris to try and find out which area now has the cheapest hotels, and we can really find one of those rubbish style hotels that George Orwell would have stayed in. I was trying to find sort of a really cheap hotel in Paris.
I can give you a list.
I've got the list here of the hotels from the Tourist Information Office. However, most of them are youth hostels, which isn't really right for the film. George Orwell stayed in a really nasty hotel with cockroaches climbing all over the cardboard walls and that sort of thing. However, 2 of the hotels on this list are actual hotels, and they're up just north of the Gare du Nord. So I'm going to head up there and see what we can find. Okay, so I've come up to the 18th arrondissement in the north of Paris to try and find an area It's more similar to the area that Orwell lived in 80 years ago. Bonjour, je cherche pour une chambre. C'est complet. This area north of the Gare du Nord in the north of Paris is far more like I imagine Orwell's area to be 80 years ago. Orwell describes most of the lodgers being immigrants, either Poles, Arabs or Italians, transient workers who come into Paris to get a job, make some money and then leave. This area is the same, though today they're mainly Africans but all francophone. And just like in the time of Orwell, people stay here for months. They don't just get a hotel room for a couple of nights. They have them for a long period of time. That's why most of the hotels around here are always full.
Bonjour, ça va? Je cherche pour une chambre. Vous avez une chambre libre? C'est combien pour un
23.
23. Ah, parfait.
Okay, so this is my hotel. I'm through here, room number 10. This is my room. Unlike in Orwell's time, you don't get semi-furnished rooms, but people still live here all year round. And check out the bedspread. Well, today's Sunday, and I start work on Wednesday. Until then, I've got absolutely no money for food or anything like that. The longest period Orwell went without food was 2.5 days. However, today things are a bit different, and you don't really need money to get food. I'm going to try something called skipping, or what we call in England we call skipping, which is where you go behind the supermarkets at the end of the day and try and get the food out of the bins that they're throwing away that's almost out of date. The best things to look for are sandwiches and things in sealed packages. Also, the great thing about Paris is that all the parks have fountains with free drinking water, so there's really no reason why I should starve or go thirsty. So come to this supermarket here, outside this supermarket, to have a look through the bins. This goes out of date yesterday. Down. So we got some meat. More meat, but I think meat's kind of dangerous. We're kind of looking for bread and vegetables. But just from these bins, we've got a selection of meats. Bit scared to try meat. Oh, melon. Some more melon. We've got some salad and some avocado. On some bread it could be alright, and at least it's not going to kill me like the meat will. Okay, so for food tonight we've got avocados and lettuce from the dustbins behind the supermarket, and we've got bread from the dustbins in front of the boulangerie. Who said there's no such thing as a free lunch? When Orwell was searching for a job, he tried to get work writing for a communist newspaper. It turned out to be a scam, but I've come here to the south of Paris, to a communist bookshop, to see if I can get any contacts in modern communist revolutionary newspapers and see if we can go along and interview them about how the French reaction to communism and to revolutionary ideas has changed in the last 80 years. I'm catching the metro to meet a journalist and academic called Fabrice Ben-Simon. He writes for this communist newspaper, Lutte Ouvrière. In the book, Orwell says that the communist newspaper that he tried to write for was quite undercover. So they had their offices hidden behind a laundrette. I've arranged to meet Fabrice in his local laundrette, and hopefully he'll be able to shed some light on the political situation in Orwell's time when he was here in Paris, and how things have changed in the 80 years since then.
In the late 20s, when Orwell was in Paris, the Communist Party had about 30,000 activists and about 1 million voters. It was a party which, although it was a legal party, was largely victimized by the authorities. So it was a legal party which had to cope with repression. Following Trotsky's opposition to the Stalinist leadership of the Soviet Union Communist Party, there was in France a group of activists who opposed Stalin, and they sided with Trotsky. And in 1929, a newspaper called La Vérité was created. La Vérité was one of the first Trotskyist left-wing opposition newspapers. A newspaper like Lutte Ouvrière is one of the Trotskyist newspapers, which have a sort of a long descent from 80 years ago. Another common point between the late 20s and today is the economic crisis. It's hard, of course, to predict what's going to take place in the future, but the early 30s provide a very telling sketch of what could happen. First, serious difficulties, but at some stage, some people striking back.
It was really interesting talking to Fabrice, and especially how he mentioned that the socialist newspaper he works for, Lutte Ouvrière, has a direct descendance back to the Trotskyist, Stalinist split that happened in the Communist Party here in France about the time that Orwell was living here, and that led to the proliferation of newspapers like the one Orwell tried to work for. This sort of gives me more of a feeling of a direct link back to the time that Orwell was here. But things have changed a lot, and politics is completely different now. There's a feeling of the same sort of thing, and like he said, there's a similar sort of economic position now to when Orwell was here. Times are getting hard, people are losing their jobs, and maybe we can learn something from the past.
One of the characters that Orwell describes living in his hotel is a guy called Henri. After being jilted numerous times by his girlfriend, he gets a job working in the sewers. On a similar note, tonight I'm going to meet a guy called Jibe. He's going to take me into the catacombs, which are a series of tunnels and secret passages dug under the whole of Paris.
C'est bon? Merde, ils arrivent. C'est bon, c'est passé, ils n'ont rien vu. Et on compacte.
Tu fais ça beaucoup?
Ouais, bah ça fait quoi, beaucoup, pas très souvent, mais ça fait depuis 23 ans que je descends.
Ouais?
Ouais.
Ah.
Il y a un égout qui a dû se percer, je sais pas, alors en dessous c'est un peu dégueulasse, mais après ça va bien.
Ouais, les gouttes d'eau.
Ouais, non, c'est les racines des arbres.
Ouais.
Bon alors là, ouais, vous savez, les gopes, quand elles sont tombées, ceux-là, il y a peut-être un gars qui est en dessous. Et là, bon, c'est plus longtemps qu'ils sont tombés, hein, on le dire. Voilà, on va dans un autre niveau encore inférieur.
Ah ouais?
Ouais. Bon, tu vois, bon là, ça va, c'est pas très profond, hein.
Ouais.
C'est des galeries qui passent en dessous des autres, n'importe. Non, mais pas beaucoup, hein. On peut le voir sans visite, il a fait la visite officielle. Il a fait tout un petit château, tout ça, Port-Mahon. Parce qu'il était enfermé dans la forteresse de Port-Mahon pendant plusieurs années, donc de mémoire il avait refait. Et là il avait essayé d'en refaire une, mais là apparemment bon, c'était un essai. Et donc ce qui lui est arrivé à ses jours, c'est qu'il bossait à l'inspection des carrières.
Monsieur JB,
voilà, je vous avais dit qu'on se reverrait. On savait qu'on se reverrait. Salut, ça va bien?
Salut, ça va?
Je me dis, c'est pas possible, on est si vieux que ça, on connaît plus personne. Ça va bien?
Bien et toi?
Bonsoir. Voilà.
J'ai pris de Carrefour à 5 ans, je suis à 4 ans, je suis
Ça fait pas longtemps.
Mais fais pas cette chienne là, c'est normal.
Ça, je peux pas comprendre.
Qu'est-ce que c'est faire?
C'est une petite salle avec des ossements.
C'est juste un endroit qui a été ouvert par curiosité en fait.
C'est des anciennes galeries de carrière.
C'est des mecs qu'on
s'en servait pour extraire la pierre.
Ah,
et construire les...
Si, c'est des mecs qu'on a tués là, puis qu'on les a enterrés.
La galerie. Voilà. Les galeries, pourquoi? C'est pour construire les monuments qu'il y a à la surface. Et ça, c'est des ossements
À l'époque, en fait, les cimetières à la surface, c'était le bordel. Tout débordait, c'était dégueulasse. Et ils ont versé tout un tas d'ossements dans les catacombes à Nanterre. Et il y en a d'autres qui ont versé en vrac dans des puits, et notamment ici, au cimetière Montparnasse, ils ont vidé un peu les ossements dans les carrières. Pour faire de la place.
C'est une fosse commune, donc ça.
Ouais, c'est une fosse commune en fait, voilà.
Ah ouais.
Voilà.
C'est bizarre.
Ouais. Il y a juste des petits scalpes de crâne, tu vois.
Ah oui.
C'est pour jouer au frisbee.
Non, c'est pas tout Paris, non, c'est le 14e.
Ouais, d'accord, ok.
Juste, tu vois, voilà, donc c'est ça. Et nous, on est là, ici. Ici. Ils descendent les filles quand voilà, on est mois d'août.
Si, un peu quand même.
Ouais.
Mais la semaine dernière, ils sont pas descendus, la semaine d'avant, ils sont descendus vendredi et samedi, quoi.
Ah ouais.
Et la semaine dernière, ils sont pas descendus.
Allez. On passera les ça. Tu sens l'air frais? C'est la sortie, ça. Ouais. Ouais, je sais qu'on est à Porte d'Orléans, mais monter le puits, tu vois, c'est pas très joyeux, quoi.
Salut.
Well, so I've got a job washing up dishes in what I'm pretty sure is the same hotel that Orwell worked in. Like him, I've got the problem that the hotel don't want to be included in the film, so they're going to remain anonymous. But I think I should be able to sneak a camera in and at least do some filming of me working there and maybe chat to some of the guys I work with. While unlike George Orwell's day, I'm not being shouted at and bossed around the whole time. They're firm and they tell you what to do, but they're very nice with it. It's very tiring, very tiring. Been here 10 hours so far today. I've got another 2 before I'm done. So I've been working now for some time in this hotel as a dishwasher and feel I can comment a little bit about the differences between Orwell's time and today. Orwell describes a descent from the opulence of the hotel to hell-like working conditions in the kitchens. I don't think the same thing exists today, even though the hotels are just as grand. The kitchens are quite alright also. They're clean and the working atmosphere is quite nice. There's a similar sort of mix of economic migrants from all over the world. I'm working mainly with South Americans and Polish, but no one's really overworked and everybody seems to enjoy their lives.
Mi nombre es Germán y bueno, yo soy amigo de Chris y nosotros trabajamos juntos en cocina. La verdad que el trabajo en cocina es un trabajo duro, uno se quema las manos, los brazos o se lastima, pero bueno, siempre hay que seguir adelante por el bien. Yo me encuentro aquí porque he salido de mi país, yo soy una persona profesional en mi país, pero por la situación económica he salido a Europa, he venido aquí a Europa también, a manera de conocer, de explorar el mundo. Y bueno, y me ha gustado Europa, he estado en España, he estado en otros países también de Europa y me encantan. La verdad es que la gente es muy buena. Bueno, aunque hay de todo también, como en todas partes, hay gente mala, buena y bueno, no quiero hablar de eso porque eso está muy mal. Y la verdad que estoy muy contento, trabajo muy duro. Lo que trato de hacer en mi vida es juntar lo que puedo de dinero, a la vez también cumplir con las obligaciones de donde yo estoy. en el país en el que estoy, pagar mis impuestos y vivir la vida, de vez en cuando tomar unas cervezas con los amigos, con mi familia. Ahora soy padre de familia también, tengo mi mujer, tengo mi familia, mi bebé, una bebé de 6 meses. Pues la verdad que si ella toma ese camino me gustaría hacerlo. Bueno, la situación es que yo estoy feliz de estar aquí trabajando. Buena suerte y mucho gusto a todos. Gracias, Chris. Que te vaya bien.
Muchísimas gracias a ti.
¿Qué te parece? La verdad.
It's not a great life, living in this hotel. The rooms are dirty, they're seldom cleaned, and when they are cleaned, the guys don't do a great job. There's no toilet in the room, just a communal one across the corridor. However, it's nothing like what Orwell had to put up with. There's no cockroach, flea or rat infestations, and the rooms are warm and comfortable. I guess what should I expect for 10 or 15 euros a night? It's just I'm getting a bit tired of living out of a backpack. I don't think I could stay here year in, year out like a lot of economic migrants do, often sharing rooms with 5 or 6 other people and sleeping in shift patterns, just so that they can send more money home. The second place George Orwell worked as a dishwasher was a brand new bar in a kind of cool, trendy, up-and-coming area of Paris, the Rue de Rivoli. Back then, 80 years ago, it was quite cool and trendy. Now it's full of tourist shops and rubbish restaurants. So I've tried to find a bar that's kind of cool and different, and I think I found it here. And this is where I'm working, washing dishes in this bar that's called Hula Hoops. It's out near Bastille, in the east of Paris. It's quite near the centre. It's a lovely bar run by really interesting people, so here goes.
Donc voilà, vous êtes au Hula Hoops et le bar d'amis et je me suis improvisé cuisinier, voilà.
This must be one of the hottest places on earth. Orwell says that the kitchen he worked in measured 15 feet long by 8 feet broad, which is about the same size as this kitchen that I'm working in here. Therefore, I'm experiencing some of the same problems that he talks about in the book, especially when there are 2 people in here. It can get pretty tight. However, I'm not finding the same problems with hygiene. He says all the food was stored on the dirt floor of a shed in the backyard, and they had cats and rats and everything else running all over it. I don't know whether it's to do with subsequent food hygiene laws or whether people are just more conscientious nowadays, but there seems to be a much more professional attitude to food preparation. Orwell says that at the Hotel X I had seen catering at its best, with unlimited money and good organisation. Now at the Auberge I learned how things were done in a thoroughly bad restaurant. I too have seen catering with unlimited budget and here catering on a budget. But there seems to be a totally different attitude towards food preparation and cooking nowadays. People take a pride in their work and they want to see things done properly. I'm sure I could have found a terrible restaurant in the style of one of Gordon Ramsay's TV shows here in Paris, but I didn't, and this was the place I ended up, and it really worked out well. I'm coming to the end of my time here in Paris, which is pretty sad. Orwell says he travelled to England 3rd class via Dunkirk. The cheapest way that I can get back to Blighty is by bus. So that's what I'm doing. I'm here at Galeni bus station in Paris, heading back to London. So I'm off the bus and I'm on the ferry travelling from Calais to Dover. Orwell says that you had to pay extra for a cabin, and so lots of people slept in the saloon. It's a similar thing today, lots of people sleeping on sofas in the bar. In the book, Orwell writes that he goes straight to London and starts living as a tramp down and out in London. As DJ Taylor writes, though, in his biography on Orwell, reality was much more prosaic, and Orwell in fact just went back to his parents' house in Southwark.
In the book, he presents himself as he presents all the characters of his fiction, which I always think are projections of himself, as someone completely alone almost without opportunity. He can only come back to England in this case because he's got the job looking after a half-wit, I think, as he describes him in the book. And yet we know that he came back to England and went straight off to live with his parents again in Southwold, in Suffolk, where they'd retired. So, as ever, there was a comfy bolt hole waiting for him if he wanted it, and he went there.
This is one of those times when I think I'm going to follow the book rather than reality, as just going back to my parents' house wouldn't be that interesting. But going straight to London and starting to live down and out there should be. Orwell doesn't write about sleeping rough in the street, in down and out. He mainly talks about staying in spikes or lodging houses. However, on the 27th of August 1931, he sent a letter to the anthropologist Dennis Collins about 2 nights he spent sleeping rough in Trafalgar Square. Today is the 30th of August, and I'm here in Trafalgar Square, and it's my first night properly sleeping rough in London. Then Orwell said it had a floating population of about 200, and that every 2 hours they'd get moved on by the police or the flatties. There's a lot of police about still, but there's not 200 people sleeping here. There's probably 200 people in the square, but none of them are really sleeping. They're just messing around in the fountains and snogging and chatting or screaming. In the back of a police car. I hope it should be alright. There's a lot of people around still. It's 2:30, and it's not like a sleeping environment really. There's one guy up there asleep on the grass, and there's a couple of people falling asleep on benches, but not like homeless, more like just drunk. The sun's now coming up, so at least I made it till morning, sleeping under one of these lines. Well, I got a few hours sleep between the front paws of one of those massive metal lines. I think I probably dropped off about 5 in the morning, and now it's 5 to 8. After Orwell had slept here in Trafalgar Square, he went up to Stuart's Cafe on St Martin's Lane. Stuart's Cafe obviously isn't there anymore, but Fernando's Cafe is. So we're going to go to Fernando's Cafe and try and order 2 slices of bread with butter and a cup of tea, which was Orwell's staple dish. That was an interesting first night, spent sleeping rough in London. However, I feel like I could do with a bit of advice. In the book, Orwell has a sort of tramp mentor, an Irish guy called Paddy, who gives him advice and tells him how to survive on the streets. I've had a tip off about a guy called Tony, again an Irish guy. He lives under London Bridge on the north side. So I'm going to go there and try and meet him and see what advice he can give me.
The Manor Centre.
The Manor Centre?
Yeah, Guy's Hospital. You've also got Seymour Place.
Okay.
Which is in Regent's Park.
Okay.
You've got nurses, you've got osteopaths. The mental health team. They all help people there. Well, you've got Trafalgar Square, Lincoln's Inn Fields and the Temple.
Yeah.
Where by about 6 o'clock, you'll see a lot of people there for sandwiches. I don't go to handouts. Go to the Manor Centre in the morning, go in, have a wash, shave, a shower. I get back here about 2, 3 o'clock, sit down, have a bottle of cider, get my head down, get up in the morning about 5 o'clock, head for McDonald's.
Really?
Yeah.
For breakfast?
Yeah. Because we live on the street, we're survivors. We don't beg, we don't ponce, we don't allow junkies around here.
You don't stay in hostels?
No.
Anything like that?
Because all you find in hostels is crackheads, junkies and alcoholics.
Really?
And they are trouble.
Yeah.
You go to the mission tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock it opens. They fight in there, they already got the Poles.
Oh, okay.
Lithuanians, Albanians, Russians. I take a drink. But the way they drink, believe me, now, in the past 2 months, there's been 4 of them found dead.
Really?
It's called hand wash. They use in hospitals. It's 90% alcohol. All they do is make it, while they put orange in it or Coca-Cola. Yeah. They kill the smell of it. There's more homeless on the street now than never has been. 4 months ago, on the pavement, I reckon there was 19 people in Camden Town on the street.
19?
Yeah.
In the whole of Camden Town?
Yeah. You can go to Regent's Park and I guarantee it's 150, 160 ex-servicemen sleeping in that park. All they keep doing is they keep the figures down. Right. When you cover the whole of London, you're talking about 4,000 to 5,000 people on the street. They are twisting the figures. I've been twisting the figures for a long time.
Yeah.
In the past 2 months, we have what's called a washdown.
Okay.
They come round about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with the police. They wash down and they move you on. Where are they going to move us?
Yeah, exactly.
I've been here 3 years.
3 years in the
Yeah,
same spot?
Yeah.
Ah.
On top, this business is owned by Barrel Lynch. The security, you've got a camera up there. They don't bother us. All the way around the building, there's cameras.
So in a way, they're sort of looking out for you?
Yeah,
in a way, it's like a bit of...
we treat them with respect and they do the same with us. But we are lucky. A lot of blokes in the street suffer from abuse and harassment. But for some odd reason, we're lucky here. You don't pay rent, you don't pay rates, you don't pay council tax, and you don't pay electric.
And you're living in the centre of London?
Yeah.
So this is my second night sleeping rough in Trafalgar Square. Last night was Saturday night and tonight's Sunday, so it's a lot quieter tonight. It's also rained, so that means there are less people, but more puddles. So it'd be harder to find a place to sleep, but I think when I do, I'll be able to get to sleep quicker. In Orwell's time, the main problem was the police who would come along and move you every couple of hours. Last night, my main problem was the security guards. The police now just walk past, don't take any notice. But the security guards don't have anything else to do really, apart from move people on who are sleeping or stop people from messing around in the fountains. So in that way, it's quite similar to Orwell's time. Right, so one of the first things we need for sleeping rough tonight is some cardboard to sleep on. And I spotted some around the back of this theatre. These ones are quite good. It should do us for the night. So we've got our cardboard mattress, sleeping bag, and a warm jacket. I guess it's better than most people have. Last night, I decided to sleep here, on the steps of St Martin's in the Field Church. It was a good night. I slept at least 4 hours, from 4 in the morning until 8. Woken by the workmen, but it's not so bad. I don't feel so knackered as I did after getting 1.5 hours sleep last night. Now I'm going to head down to the Manor Centre on Mellier Street. Not the actual morning I went to the Manor Centre, which is the first hostel or shelter that I've been in. When you first arrive, they offer you a choice of a cheese or spam sandwich, and there's a gigantic urn full of sugary, milky tea. About an hour later, they cooked up some pasta with fish, and you could have it with baked beans. Strange thing happened when I was there though. One of the old boys I was chatting to offered me some friendly advice. He said I had to watch out for men, as I was pretty and that they would take advantage of me. In the book, Orwell says that the majority of the tramping population is male, and they often resort to homosexuality. I don't know if this guy was sort of referencing that. Well, this is where I slept last night, on the steps of St Martin's in the Field Church. And it was quite comfortable. I got about 4 hours sleep. It was alright. However, the weather forecast for tonight is for torrential rain. So I'm going to have to look for some place a bit more watertight. That was a hard night. I ended up taking refuge here, in the porch of Spaghetti House. The rain started with a vengeance at about 5 in the morning, and at 7 in the morning, a Polish street sweeper guy decided he was going to wake me up, basically just for a chat. The Paris and London sections of Orwell's Down and Out aren't just distinguishable by their geographic locations, but by a change of tone in Orwell's writing. No doubt this was affected by the different situations he now found himself in, but it makes the second half of the book a far more depressing read. Orwell graphically describes Paris with all the zestful repugnance of a young man exploring the underbelly of a new culture. Ernest Hemingway, who was writing in Paris at the same time as Orwell, says that if one is lucky enough to experience Paris as a young man, then wherever one goes for the rest of one's life, it goes with you, for Paris is a movable feast. Even though the experiences of Orwell in Down and Out are tougher than those of Hemingway in A Movable Feast, it still sounds as though he's enjoying himself. And later in Orwell's life, he talked about his time in Paris with nostalgic affection. This comes across in the book, and the London section is far more pragmatic, more morose. But it's here that Orwell first tackles the social problems and class inequalities that became a leitmotif in his later work. One could say that it was here that the scribe of 1984 and Animal Farm was really born. I think this film has followed a similar trajectory. Gone is the youthful optimism that I approached everything in Paris, replaced by a dejected cynicism, brought about in part by the fact that I don't feel like I belong here. I don't feel like I have a role in this society. Though I've spent nearly 3 months living in or around Trafalgar Square, I still feel like the tourists have more claim to it than I do. If there is one thing I'll take from my time living on the streets of London, it is how easily someone in full view can completely disappear. By putting on these clothes and associating myself with the material culture of the dispossessed, I completely vanish from public view. I'm suddenly something to be shied away from, circumnavigated on their terribly important and socially acceptable expeditions around town. This leads to me feeling like an outsider looking in, a social reject, a member of a meritless subculture. This subaltern mentality allows, or even demands, the rejection of social norms and the rules and barriers that come with them. People in this situation are pushed so far out of normal society that they react against it, act up to people's preconceived ideas. A self-fulfilling prophecy of midday drunkenness and idle shuffling around. Added to this the fact that most people on the street are either substance dependent, mentally ill, or institutionalized, either through hospitalization, the prisons, or the armed forces. These socially prescribed expectations are the only contact they have with the outside world, the only post-institutional guidance handed down to them from normal society. 10 pence begrudgingly given with the ironic postscript, "Now don't spend it on drink and drugs." After 2 weeks sleeping rough, the monotony of this outcast routine made me want to turn to drink or drugs. Anything to dull the senses. Anything to sink into a hole that made being socially invisible understandable. That was another uncomfortable night, sleeping on the street. I started this project in May, returned to London in August, and I've spent the last 2.5, 3 months sleeping rough. It's getting pretty cold now, and I think it's time to find some better accommodation. So I've come here to the London offices of a magazine called The Pavement. It's a magazine that's written for homeless people to read, and as well as including articles and cartoons on subjects that would be of interest to them, it has a section called The List that details all the services that are available for rough sleepers in the capital.
To be honest about it, you can't actually get into accommodation unless you're on benefits. So you've got to sign on and go the whole hog with housing benefit. And 90% of hostels run like that, if not more. You know, maybe 99% of hostels. And if you turn up at this hostel and that's where you've been referred to, because you'd have to be referred in, the first thing they'll do probably is assess your eligibility for, and maybe even start filling out the forms to claim the benefit, because that's how they pay it. You know, they don't have to worry about coming to you, they just get you on the benefits and then the money comes in. And there aren't any places that offer any alternative, except in winter when you've got the church shelters open up. And they run quite a long time, you know, from November until March. They're quite basic and tend to be sort of top off about 30 people per shelter. About, you know, the 6,500 hostel spaces there are in London are going to be if you can sign on.
As Richard from The Pavement was saying, you need to be on some type of government benefit today to get into a homeless shelter. This was different 80 years ago. Orwell writes that he mainly stayed in spikes that were homeless shelters attached to workhouses, and providing you had no money and no tobacco, you could get a free night's sleep and even some grub in the morning. The closest thing to this today are the church-based schemes, and I'm now off to meet a guy called Mark Brennan, who runs one such project in North London.
There are now 11 projects like ours around London, and they're all sort of similar kind of model, a circuit of 7 churches, each with a designated night of the week, opening at 7:30, offering meal, hospitality, bed overnight and breakfast the next morning for up to, in our case, 15 guests. You know, we try and keep the questions and box ticking to a minimum and keep the rules to a minimum for folks, because it's our belief that, you know, every time you do that, you're just rehashing and reiterating their shortcomings and failings, and you're just, in a lot of cases, all it's doing is pushing them further into their shell of shame. The approach seems to be one on the statutory side of, and even in a lot of cases on the voluntary side, of trying to fix people. Well, there have been calls by Homeless Link and the government to end rough sleeping and eradicate homelessness. Homelessness is a ubiquitous, unquenchable dilemma, and it is worldwide, crosses all boundaries, crosses all cultural divides. You know, that it's not going away, you know, and it never will go away. Let's just try and understand it as opposed to eradicate it.
This church participates in the scheme that Mark runs, and as he said, there's only 15 beds here. When Orwell did this, he just pretended he was homeless to get a bed in the spikes he stayed in. But my social conscience won't let me do that, especially as I know I'd be taking a bed away from someone who needs it far more than I do. Therefore, I've agreed to volunteer to work for this programme, which means I'll be setting up the hostels in the early evening, helping cook the dinner, and then staying the night over in the hostel, which means I get to see all sides of what happens here, and I get to help out a little as well.
60. 68.
Bingo! One of the main difficulties I've had with making this film is the fact I actually have to film stuff and carry a camera around to do that. This changes social situations and brings up a host of moral problems when filming with vulnerable people. Orwell didn't have this problem because he was writing and could experience stuff innocuously to write it up sometimes years later. To get around this, I'm going to hook up with a homeless guy called Ian, and he's going to give us his account of the church hostel scheme.
Not a bad day. Where tonight though? So each night you stay at a different hostel and you've got to be in by 7:30 or 8:30 to claim your bed, and then which isn't a good a nice thing either. It's like going to school again, but it's a roof over your head. So then, and you're out at 8:30 in the morning. So here we go again for another day of what to do. I don't know. Go and try and do the laundry first anyway, and then we'll take it from there, see how we get on from the day then. It doesn't look like it's going to be a bad day, so hopefully the rain stays away, you know. Last night it wasn't too bad. The pipes in the place rattle like hell, you know, tend to keep you awake at night, but it's okay, you know, the food was okay. So I'm just going to try and get in here and get my laundry done. It's a bit late, I don't know if I'll get it done, like, but we'll give it a shot anyway. That's all you can do, you know.
What'd they say?
Big no. 3 days on the trot now I've been trying to get my laundry in there. There's a street cafe just down here from the Simon community. And they do sandwich, cup of tea, you know. And sit down and relax for a while, because you do nothing but walk all day anyway, you know. So it gives you a chance to have a break, you know, somewhere to sit for half an hour or an hour, you know. They're alright, the Simon, they don't try and push religion on you, you know what I mean? A lot of them try and push religion on you. These just to let you do your thing, you know, help you out any way they can as well, you know. That's it. Now we have Oscar Wilde, another famous Irish fella. Conversation with Oscar Wilde, 1854 to 1900. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars, you know. I know what he means, you know. He's looking at the stars now for the rest of his life, isn't he? But you get fed up walking. It's just a constant battle with defeat, you know. Well, we've got 2.5 hours to kill now, and we get nearer to where the shelter is, and yeah, because there's nothing to do. You have boredom, you know what I mean? Boredom's just the big thing, you know what I mean? You get a couple of pounds, get a couple of cans. Too expensive to go to the pub. Get a couple of cans, sit in the park. You are forced into it, you know, because you have absolutely nowhere to go. You're walking around all day, you know what I mean? Nothing to do and all day to do it. You should try this on your own, man. You know what I mean? You get fed up, but at least I had you to talk to today, but any other day you just waltzing on your own, you know, it's no fun whatsoever. You know, so don't try it, you know. This is it. So here we are at the next place for the night. We'll hang out here for half an hour or so, and let us in, relax then for the evening with some hot food. That's it then, it's another day tomorrow, doing the same thing. Trying to find something to do to keep yourself occupied. From one day to the next until you get yourself out of the hole you're in. You know, this can't go on forever. You know, it's only a short period for myself, but some guys probably are a lot longer.
After Orwell had finished writing Down and Out, which he was then calling a Scullion's Diary, he followed the annual working class migration from the East End of London down to Kent to go hop picking. No one really does that anymore, but I've come down to Kent to go apple picking, trying to follow in the footsteps of Orwell as best I can. He gave the only manuscript of Down and Out to a friend of his called Mabel Fearts, with the instructions that she should burn it and save the paperclips. Luckily for Orwell and for us, she didn't, and instead passed it on to a friend of hers called Leonard Moore, who then passed it on to an acquaintance of his called Victor Golans, who ended up publishing Down and Out. was Orwell's first book, and he was now officially a writer. Orwell ends the book by saying that, at present, I do not feel that I have seen more than the fringe of poverty. Still, I can point out one or two things I've definitely learned from being hard up. I shall never again think that all tramps are drunken scoundrels, nor expect a beggar to be grateful when I give him a penny, nor be surprised if men out of work lack energy, nor subscribe to the Salvation Army, nor pawn my clothes, nor refuse a handbill, nor enjoy a meal in a smart restaurant. That is a beginning. And it was a beginning for him. It was his first book. I'm under no illusions that this film has been the most in-depth analysis of poverty or homelessness in today's society, but I do think it to be a good recreation of Orwell's methodology today. Like him, I have at times relied on the help and hospitality of friends and strangers, but also ventured out on my own further than I thought I ever would. And like him, the whole experience has taught me a great deal. I can now see that we're all only a couple of paychecks away from poverty, but that the highly structured class system that so intrigued Orwell no longer exists today. It's been replaced by a minuscule upper class of people who seem to have everything, a vastly bloated middle class of people who work, and an underclass of people who don't work, may never work, and survive on government benefits. Like Orwell, I don't offer a solution to the homeless situation in London. I think there are a lot of great people and organisations who are doing a lot of good work to combat the problem, yet I don't think chasing after quotas or targets is really beneficial to anybody. As to whether my phenomenological approach to this project has made me feel any closer to Orwell as a person or understand more about what made him tick, I'm not sure. I've certainly learned a lot more about him in researching this film. But there exists something in the tumultuous 80 years that separate our experiences that I haven't been able to bridge, and Orwell remains a phantom, a spectre hovering just out of reach. Orwell died on the 21st of January 1950, and on the 26th of January 1950, on a day not too dissimilar to this, he was buried here in the small Oxfordshire village of Sutton Courtenay. I know that as with the book, this film isn't an exact representation of the process through which it was made. Like the George Orwell of Down and Out, and the Eric Blair who lived in Paris and London in the late 20s and early 30s. The Chris Martin in this film is different from the Chris Martin who made this film. I agree with DJ Taylor when he says that there was no great plan of Orwell's to become George Orwell. But there are some fundamental differences between the corporeal man and the character in his books. On the one hand, Eric Arthur Blair, or at least what remains of him, lies 6 feet below where I am here. Whereas George Orwell seems to live on, not just through his texts, his books and his essays, but through the immense impact he had on political opinion, literature, and the society we live in today. It's been nearly 2 years since I sat on this roof and introduced this film by saying that if nothing else, it'd be an adventure. And it's certainly been that. This little book hasn't just led me on a journey through poverty, but actually into poverty myself. If there's one thing I'll take from comparing my experience today with that of Orwell's 80 years ago, is that poverty is omnipresent. It is as old as society itself. As long as there have been people who have, there have existed those who have not. There's very little that can be done about this, as it is through these inequalities that cultures are generated and propagated. In a society where everybody was equal, there would be no mechanisms for cultures to exist. Therefore, we should not be trying to eradicate poverty, but understand it as an inevitable consequence of human existence. There are differences too with Orwell's time. I was hoping to find an idealised romantic version of a tramp like he writes about, but they don't seem to exist anymore. Replaced by a cynical, substance-dependent, institutionalised diaspora of misfits and vagrants, which I am now proud to count myself among their number. The total immersion process by which I made this film has reduced me to a type of poverty I've never experienced before. Renting out my apartment here has become an economic necessity rather than just a research technique. Following Orwell's down and out footprints has made me down and out myself. Though if nothing else, it's been an adventure.